63 floors of glass and steel, and Mara Chen had never once learned the name of the man who cleaned them. That was not unusual. That was, in fact, the point. The janitor's name was Ellis Vance. He had worked the night shift at Hargrove Capital for 11 years. He knew which executives left their blinds open when they argued on the phone. He knew which conference rooms smelled like bourbon after 9 p.m. He knew the building the way only invisible people know things, completely and without anyone's permission. On a Tuesday in March, Ellis Vance spoke up in a meeting he had not been invited to. By Thursday morning, he was gone. Mara Chen, CEO of Hargrove Capital, youngest woman to hold the position in the firm's 40-year history, would later describe that Thursday as the day she made a decision she was confident in. She would not use the word confident again for a long time after that. What she did not know on Thursday, what she could not have known or had chosen not to, was that Ellis Vance had spent 11 years noticing things, and that 3 of those things, taken together, were worth considerably more than her career. She found that out on a Monday. Mondays at Hargrove Capital started at 6:45 a.m. in the executive corridor on the 61st floor. Glass walls, no soft surfaces, lighting calibrated to suggest productivity rather than comfort. Mara arrived first, the way she always arrived first, because she had learned early that the person who controls the room's first impression controls everything that happens in it afterward. She had run Hargrove for 4 years. She had taken it from a mid-tier regional firm to a nationally recognized name in restructuring and acquisition consulting. She had done this by being precise, unsentimental, and faster than the people around her at identifying what mattered and what was performance. She was good at her job. She was also, in ways she had not yet been required to examine, surrounded. The man responsible for surrounding her was named Richard Solano. He was 58 years old, senior partner, and had spent the last 14 months engineering what he preferred to call a realignment of Hargrove's leadership structure. In private, among the 2 partners he trusted, he called it something simpler, a correction. Mara did not know about the realignment. She knew Solano was ambitious and territorial, and that he smiled at her in board meetings with the warmth of a man who had already decided the outcome. She had assessed him as manageable. She had been managing him for 2 years with the practiced efficiency of someone who had managed difficult men her entire career. She had not understood that this particular man was not competing with her. He was waiting for her. Ellis Vance had understood it for 7 months. The Tuesday meeting had not been scheduled. It had assembled itself the way urgent things assemble in organizations. A threshold crossed, a number confirmed, a decision that could not be unmade once made. 3 of Hargrove's senior directors had gathered in Conference Room B on the 59th floor at 7:15 p.m. The building's cleaning rotation brought Ellis to that corridor at 7:20. He did not go in. He was not the kind of man who inserted himself into rooms. He was 54 years old, careful by nature, and had spent enough years watching powerful people to understand that the powerful rarely welcomed observation from people they had decided not to see. But the door to Conference Room B had not latched properly. The gap was 3 inches. And what came through the gap was not loud, but it was specific. The name Mara Chen. The phrase controlled transition. A number 340 million. Spoken with the casual precision of men who had already counted it, and 1 sentence, delivered in Solano's particular register of calm authority. She signs the Meridian contract Thursday. After that, it's irreversible. Ellis stood in the corridor for 4 seconds. Then he pushed his cart past the door and continued down the hall and finished his shift. He spent the next 6 days deciding what to do. He had no one obvious to tell. This was the architecture of his invisibility made plain. 11 years in the building, and he had no relationship with anyone above the facilities manager, a decent man named Greg, who handled scheduling and equipment requests and was not equipped for what Ellis was now carrying. He thought about going to Mara Chen directly. He had seen her in the building the way he saw everyone, not as an encounter, but as a pattern. She arrived early. She left late. She walked the corridors with the forward lean of someone always arriving somewhere that mattered. She did not look at him when they passed, but this was not contempt. It was the ordinary inattention of a person whose cognitive bandwidth was entirely consumed by problems she had decided were the ones that counted. He thought she might listen. He thought she might not. He decided on the seventh day to try. The opportunity came in the form of a facilities review. Once a quarter, Hargrove's operations team ran a walkthrough of each floor with the cleaning staff to flag maintenance issues, burnt bulbs, damaged panels, HVAC irregularities. It was administrative and unglamorous, and executives occasionally wandered through the relevant corridors in a way that suggested they had forgotten the review was happening. Mara Chen was in the 59th floor corridor at 8:40 a.m. on a Wednesday when Ellis Vance stepped out of the supply room and said quietly, and with the particular care of a man who had rehearsed this, "Ms. Chen, I apologize for the interruption. There's something I need to tell you." She stopped. She looked at him. The look was not unkind. It was the look of a person recalibrating, updating the category she had placed him in to accommodate the unexpected fact that he was speaking to her with intention. "I work the night shift," he said. "I've been here 11 years. Last Tuesday evening I was in the corridor outside conference room B." He told her what he had heard. He did not embellish. He gave her the name, the phrase, the number, the sentence. He spoke for 90 seconds and stopped. Mara Chen was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "What's your name?" "Ellis Vance." She looked at him for another moment. Something moved through her expression. Not disbelief exactly, but a kind of internal friction. The resistance of a mind that has ordered itself around a particular picture of its situation and is now receiving information that does not fit the frame. "Thank you," she said, and walked away. Ellis watched her go and could not tell, from the set of her shoulders, whether he had done something useful or something irreversible. It turned out to be both. Mara spent the rest of Wednesday in a state she would not have named to anyone and barely admitted to herself. Not fear. Fear was reactive, and she was not reactive. It was something quieter and more corrosive. The feeling of looking at a landscape you believed you knew and finding a feature in it that had always been there and that you had, somehow, arranged not to see. She did not pull Solano's files immediately. She did not call legal. She did not do any of the things she would have done if she had been certain, because certainty would have required her to act, and she was not ready to act until she understood the shape of what she was acting against. What she did instead was a mistake. She called her head of HR, a woman named Patricia Gould, who had been with the firm for 9 years, who was efficient and discreet, and whom Mara had never had reason to distrust. She described the encounter in the corridor. She used Ellis Vance's name. She asked Patricia to look into the Tuesday evening meeting, who had signed into conference room B, what time, whether there was a log. Patricia said she would look into it. Patricia called Richard Solano 11 minutes later. The termination paperwork reached Ellis Vance's facilities manager the following morning. The stated reason was a conduct violation, specifically approaching an executive without authorization during business hours and making unverified and potentially defamatory claims about senior leadership. Greg, the facilities manager, read the document twice. He had managed the cleaning staff at Hargrove for 6 years. He had never processed a termination for this reason. He looked at Ellis's file. 11 years, no disciplinary record, 2 commendations from the operations director, E, and then he called HR to confirm the paperwork was correct. Patricia Gould confirmed it was. Ellis Vance received the notice on Thursday morning. He read it standing in the locker room in the basement level of the building. He read it once, folded it, and put it in the chest pocket of his uniform. Then he opened his locker, took out the small personal items he kept there, a photograph, a phone charger, a paperback novel with a broken spine, and placed them in a bag. He did not say anything to the men around him who were watching with the careful stillness of people who understood that what they were witnessing was a warning as much as a termination. He walked out of the building at 8:17 a.m. into a gray March morning. He sat on the bench across the street for a while and looked at the building. Then he took out his phone and made a call. The person he called was named Diane Vance, his younger sister. She was 49 years old and worked as a paralegal at a firm in the financial district that specialized in employment and corporate whistleblower law. He had almost called her 7 days ago before going to Mara Chen. He had chosen not to because he had thought the direct route was the faster one. He was not wrong about that. He had simply miscalculated what fast, in this situation, was going to cost him. Diane picked up on the second ring. He told her what had happened. All of it. The corridor, the meeting, the numbers, the sentence, what he had told Mara Chen. The termination notice dated the morning after. Diane did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Ellis, do not throw away that notice." "I know," he said. "And the conversation in the corridor. You're certain about the number?" 340 million, he said. "And the name of the contract." Another pause. "Okay," Diane said. "Come to my office." While Ellis Vance was crossing the city toward his sister's office, Mara Chen was sitting in her 61st floor office looking at the Meridian contract. She had pulled it at 7 a.m. She had been looking at it since. It was 140 pages. She had read the relevant sections 3 times. Section 7, Subclause D. Section 12. The appendix marked confidential counsel review only, which she had signed without the review because the timeline had been compressed and her legal team had flagged no concerns, and she had trusted the process because the process had always before now been trustworthy. The number was there. Not 340 million as a payment. 340 million as a threshold. The valuation figure above which a change of control provision in the appendix became active. A provision that, once triggered, transferred primary fiduciary authority over Hargrove's restructuring division from the CEO to a majority partnership vote. Solano held 3 partnership votes directly. 2 more through proxies Mara had not identified as his because they had not behaved as his until now. 5 votes. Majority. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The Meridian contract was scheduled to close Thursday. It was Thursday. She reached for her phone. Her hand stopped an inch from it. Patricia Gould had known about the Ellis Vance conversation within minutes. That meant her phone was not safe. Her email was not safe. Whatever she did next, she could not do it from inside the building's communication systems. She stood up, put on her coat, told her assistant she had a 9 a.m. off-site, walked to the elevator, descended to the lobby, and walked out of the building into the cold March morning. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at her phone, her personal phone, not the company device, and pulled up a number she had not called in 2 years. The number belonged to a man named James Whitfield. He was 61 years old, retired general counsel, and had been Mara's mentor during her first 5 years in the industry before he left to consult independently. He was direct, unglamorous, entirely outside the Hargrove ecosystem, and one of 3 people on Earth Mara trusted without qualification. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She told him what she had, the contract, the number, the provision, what she had heard from Ellis Vance, what Patricia had done with that information, and the fact that today was Thursday. James was quiet for 6 seconds. Then he said, "The man they fired, where is he now?" "I don't know," Mara said. "I fired him." Another pause. "Mara," he said, and his voice had the particular flatness of a person choosing their words with the precision of someone who does not want to say the thing they are about to say. "You need to find him." Finding Ellis Vance took Mara 4 hours and 3 phone calls. One to Greg, the facilities manager, who gave her Diane Vance's name after a long pause that contained an entire conversation about institutional loyalty that neither of them said aloud, and 2 to directory listings before she reached Diane's firm. Diane Vance did not take the call immediately. Her assistant put Mara on hold for 3 minutes. When Diane came on the line, her voice was the voice of a woman who had spent the morning doing her own research and had arrived at a position. Ms. Chen, Diane said. My brother came to you in good faith. You terminated him the next morning. I know, Mara said. I want to be clear that we are currently documenting a whistleblower retaliation claim that is straightforward enough that I could file it before lunch. I know that too, Mara said. I need to speak with Ellis. Why? Mara looked at the street in front of her. A woman was walking a dog. A taxi moved through a yellow light. The ordinary city, indifferent to the fact that her professional life was in the process of being disassembled from the inside by a man who smiled at her in board meetings. Because he was right, she said, and I handled it badly, and I need his help. A pause. Hold, Diane said. They met at a coffee shop 4 blocks from Diane's office. Mara arrived first. Ellis walked in 7 minutes later, still in his work jacket because he had not gone home. He sat down across from her and looked at her with the steady assessment of a man who had decided on his walkover that he was going to listen before he decided anything. Mara did not open with an apology. She opened with the contract. She laid the relevant pages on the table, printed from her personal email, sent to herself from the lobby of a copy shop down the street, and pointed to the provision. She explained what it meant. She told him what she now believed about Solano, about Patricia, about the architecture of the last 14 months. Ellis listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" "The conversation in conference room B," she said. "Everything you heard. Exact words, exact sequence. And I need to know, was there anything else? Anything in the last months you noticed that you didn't think to mention because you didn't think it was connected?" Ellis was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "3 things," he said. The first thing was a name. 6 months ago, Ellis had been cleaning the 58th floor executive suite at 10 p.m. when he passed the open door of a conference room and saw Richard Solano on a call. Not unusual. Solano worked late, but Ellis had seen the name on the video call screen before the door closed. The name was Leonard Marsh. Leonard Marsh was the lead acquisition partner at a firm called Vantage Meridian Group, the firm on the other side of the Meridian contract. The call had been social in tone, the kind of warmth that exists between men who have already made a decision together and are now simply enjoying having made it. The second thing was a document. 3 months ago, during a deep clean of the senior partner's floor, Ellis had found in the paper recycling bin outside Solano's office, not shredded, recycled, because someone had made an error or hadn't thought it mattered. A sinsingri and sign shambri chu. Summary sheet. At the top, in small type, Hargrove Capital Post-Transition Org Chart, Draft 4. Mara's name was not on it. Solano's name was at the top. Ellis had photographed it with his phone before placing it in the recycling bag. He took out his phone and showed her the photograph. Mara looked at it for 4 seconds. She looked at the table for 2 more. Then she looked up. "What's the third thing?" she said. The third thing was a room. 2 months ago, Ellis had been assigned to clean a storage space on the 55th floor that was technically decommissioned, no longer on the regular rotation because it had been removed from the active floor plan during a renovation 2 years prior. He had been sent there specifically because the facilities team had received a humidity alert from that corridor, and someone needed to check it physically. He had found the room unlocked. Inside, on a folding table, was a laptop, a portable router, and a stack of printed documents. The documents were face down. He had not touched them. But the laptop screen was open and still active, and the document visible on it bore the Hargrove capital letterhead and a title. Meridian Integration, Internal Communications Archive. Ellis had stood in the doorway of that room for 5 seconds. Then he had closed the door, returned to the facility's office, logged the humidity reading, and noted the room as requiring follow-up inspection. He had not gone back. The room, Mara said carefully. Is it still in the building? I don't know, Ellis said. I haven't been in the building since 8 a.m. Mara looked at her watch. It was 1:47 p.m. The meridian closing was scheduled for 3 o'clock. What happened in the next 73 minutes was not elegant. Elegance requires margin. It requires the ability to move at the pace of deliberate strategy rather than the pace of a situation that has already begun to close. Mara Chen had spent 4 years building Hargrove into something worth taking. She had done it with patience and precision and the long architecture of a person who planned further ahead than the people around her. She had 73 minutes. She called James Whitfield from the coffee shop table. She called her personal attorney, not Hargrove's legal team, her own, a woman named Susan Reyes who had handled her private contracts since year one. She called the Hargrove Board's independent director, a man named Charles Obie, who sat on the oversight committee and who had, in 4 years, given her no reason to believe he was anything other than what he appeared to be. She made all 3 calls in 11 minutes. Diane Vance sat beside Ellis across the table and said nothing, but had opened her laptop and was typing with the focused intensity of a woman who had been waiting for a reason to move. James said he would call 2 people and call back. Susan said she could be at Hargrove's lobby in 35 minutes. Charles Obie said, after a silence that lasted long enough to tell Mara what she needed to know about where he stood, "Send me what you have." She sent him the contract pages from her phone. He called back in 4 minutes. "I'm postponing the 3 o'clock, he said. The room on the 55th floor was still there. Susan Reyes and a forensic IT consultant she had called from the lobby, a man named Aaron Park, who carried a black case and spoke exclusively in technical shorthand, were escorted to the room at 2:31 p.m. by Charles Obie, who had descended from the boardroom without explanation to anyone who had expected him to stay. The laptop was gone. The router was gone. The documents were gone. But the table was still there, and Aaron Park, who had not yet put down his black case, walked to the outlet strip behind the table and found, still running, a device no larger than a thumb drive, plugged into the last port. He looked at it. He looked at Charles Obie. He said one word: extraction. The device had been running for an unknown period. It was connected to the building's internal network through a secondary channel that bypassed the standard security monitoring. What it had extracted, what it had been extracting, and to where would take hours to determine. But it was running. It was still running, which meant it had not finished, which meant they had not lost everything yet. Richard Solano received the postponement notice at 2:58 p.m. He was in his office, jacket on, expression calibrated to the particular warmth of a man preparing for a choreographed victory. His phone was face up on the desk. When the notification appeared, he looked at it without moving for several seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called a number. The number rang 7 times. No one answered. He called a second number. That one rang through to voicemail immediately, which meant the phone had been turned off, which meant the person who owned it had been told to turn it off, which meant something had moved in the last hour that Solano had not been told about. He sat in his chair with the stillness of a man recalculating in real time. He had spent 14 months building to 3 p.m. on this Thursday. He had managed the contract, the timeline, the votes, the internal communications. He had managed Patricia. He had managed the board approach. He had managed the external team. He had not managed the janitor. The emergency board session convened at 4:15 p.m. in the 61st floor boardroom. It had been called by Charles Obie under his independent director authority with a 90-minute notice period that was the minimum required by Hargrove's governance charter. Solano arrived with 2 of the 5 votes he needed. The other 3, his proxies, had been reached by Charles Obie's office before they received Solano's call, and 2 of them had found reasons not to arrive. Mara sat at the head of the table with Susan Reyes to her left and a 14-page document that Susan had drafted in a moving car between 2 o'clock and 3:45 p.m. In front of every board member was a copy. The first page was the org chart photograph that Ellis Vance had taken from a recycling bin on the 58th floor 3 months ago on a Tuesday night. No one in the room spoke when they turned to it. Mara gave them 6 seconds. Then she said, "I want to talk about what was planned for today. And then I want to talk about the extraction device that Aaron Park removed from the 55th floor at 2:37 p.m. And then I want to talk about Section 9, Subclause D, and the reason I will be filing for nullification under Clause 22B before this meeting concludes." She paused. She looked at Solano. "And then," she said, "I'd like Richard to explain Leonard Marsh." Richard Solano's expression did not change, but his right hand, resting on the table, moved 1 centimeter to the left in the particular way of a hand that has just received information from the body it belongs to and has no useful instruction to return. He said nothing. That was, as it turned out, the last decision of his career at Hargrove Capital. The legal process that followed was not quick. It lasted 4 months and involved 3 regulatory bodies, 2 law firms, 1 federal investigation into the extraction device and the data it had transmitted, and a whistleblower protection filing that Diane Vance submitted with the efficiency of someone who had been ready to file it for 12 hours before she had reason to. Ellis Vance was reinstated on the Monday following the board session. Greg, the facilities manager, processed the paperwork personally. He returned to the night shift. The building was the same building. The floors were the same floors. The corridors at 11 p.m. had the same particular quality of quiet that he had always found more comfortable than noise. On his first night back, he arrived at the 61st floor at his scheduled time, 10:40 p.m., and found the executive corridor lit at the far end, which meant someone was still in the building. He cleaned around it the way he always did. At 11:15, the light in Mara Chen's office was still on. He knocked once on the open door. She looked up. She was at her desk with 2 stacks of documents and an expression that was not the forward-focused expression he usually observed from a distance. It was something more tired and more human than that. "Mr. Vance?" she said. "Ms. Chen." He held the doorframe for a moment. "I just wanted to say, I'm back." She looked at him. In the 4 months of legal proceedings and depositions and regulatory interviews, they had been in the same room 7 times. Each time, it had been structured and formal and surrounded by counsel. They had not spoken directly since the coffee shop. "I know," she said. "I'm glad." He nodded. He started to pull the door back toward him. "Mr. Vance?" she said. He stopped. "I should have listened in the hallway," she said. "I should have asked your name first and listened second. I had the order wrong." Ellis looked at her for a moment. "You listened eventually," he said. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's an accurate one," he said. "You had 73 minutes and you didn't waste them." Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than a smile. The look of a person receiving information they intend to keep. "Good night, Ms. Chen," he said. "Good night, Mr. Vance." He pulled the door to its previous position and continued down the corridor. The building made its evening sounds around him. The low HVAC hum, the distant compression of the elevators, the particular silence of 42 floors of glass and steel at rest. Ellis Vance pushed his cart to the next room and began the work of making the place clean again. He had always been good at that. He had simply, for 11 years, been the only one who knew it. Until now. End.